Kia ora koutou. I hope you're all doing okay. Let me know if the sound is all coming through. Hopefully you can all see me here. We have some interesting stuff to go through this week with regards to circuits and looking at conductors and insulators as well. I'm hoping that you found the slides okay. Hopefully if you need a little bit of some of these concepts gone through in a different way, this will help you out. And you can always flick back to later points or earlier points in the video once we've gone through it. If you need to see these things again, and if there's any questions as we're going through these things today, you can fire them off in the chat, or you can save them for our Google Meet on Friday. All right, let's dive into the content for today. And just as I was saying, you can always fire off those questions as we're going through. All right, so our Te Rautaki Te Wiki is covering two major sets of concepts. The first is circuit types and circuit diagrams. Now this is something that you've kind of been introduced to, hopefully in Year 9, but we're going to solidify it, right, and improve our understanding of these things. Because you'll have a lot of electrical devices in your lives now. You'll have electrical circuits in the walls of your own homes, and it's important that we understand kind of the basics of how these work. So we're going to look at that today and look at ways to represent them so we can understand them better. We're also going to look at conductors and insulators, which you kind of know about with regards to temperature, but we're going to reframe some of that understanding with regards to the movement of electrons that comes with circuits. We've also got some opportunities for revision here, so hopefully this is a little bit less of a workload than last week. We want to keep these things manageable, so that you can keep your focus and also balance the kind of work-life stuff that comes up when you're locked down for a while. All right, let's get into the content for today. Okay, so first lesson is on circuits and circuit diagrams. Now last week we had a little bit of a look at components, right? Components of various circuits, and you'll see that there's a list of components here. Now it's our expectation you coming into this that you're already familiar with these different components. The only one you might not have seen from last week is the one with M, which is motor. And that's just kind of a simplified representation, but you can understand if you were building a little remote controlled car, right, and you've got your battery, which is that I'll show it with my cursor, which is this one here, that if that's plugged up to a motor, you could put some power through this and then get the motor spinning, and then that could get the car moving forwards. You could also have a little switch in there when you turn it on and off, and maybe that switch is controlled by another circuit that you can radio in with your little remote control. So all of these things kind of work together to form these circuits. So have a go at this, see if you can do those, and the answers are always on that next slide over here, just to check that you do understand these things. All right. There's also a video here, and this is quite a fun one. This is a kind of slightly old video, but it goes through a lot of the fundamentals you need to know, and it's quite engaging. So I'd recommend spending some time with that. They also have someone in the video getting a little bit zapped, which is quite fun. On that note, I have an additional question for you. So here, we're going to try something new using the chat and all of this sort of system. So if you're watching this live, what I want you to do is I'm going to load up this video about 30 seconds in. So you can see we've got 4 people here, all standing, and one of them is standing holding the fence there. Each of these people is standing on something that's theoretically going to insulate them from the ground. So that electric fence is on. Another person is going to come in and touch this person on the end while standing with their feet firmly on the ground. I want you to have a go at seeing what you think will happen. So if you think the person touching the fence is the only person who's going to get shocked, which is this guy here, you can type A in the chat. If you think it's the person who's touching the ground is the only person who's going to get shocked, then type B in the chat. If you think everybody except the person who's standing on the ground is going to get shocked, you can type C in the chat. If you think everyone's going to get a zap and everyone's going to be hurting, you can type D in the chat. If you're watching this later on, you can either type it as a comment or keep it in your mind. And I'm going to reveal the answer in 5 seconds, so get your vote in. Okay? Alright. Okay. We all got our guesses in. We've got our ideas. Okay. So, I'm going to reveal the answer. We'll start 33 seconds in. So here we go. We see that he's tentatively touching his hand. Yeah, they all get zapped. Every single one of them. Because, and the reason for this, is there's that flow of electrons going through. So if you wrote D, or you had D in your mind, you got that one correct. So, what we're seeing there is a representation of why we need to be careful about electricity. Electric fences are designed to give you a short, sharp shock that doesn't cause permanent harm, at least to animals, so that they're incentivized to stay away. Ideally, we don't want to be doing some of these sorts of things with circuits that don't have those safety features in mind. So, with that out of the way, we're going to move on to looking at some of the tasks for this week. So the first task is around drawing circuit diagrams. So there are some rules when we're drawing circuit diagrams, and you'll probably be familiar with these already because they're basically pretty similar to the rules we have for graphs. So you've got to try and use a ruler and a pencil. The reason why we do that is because you want the lines to be straight, so they're really easy to understand, and you want to be able to rub out any mistakes. So these are rules of thumb that we like to use. Now, just as in a circuit, in order for the circuit to conduct electricity, all the wires have to be touching, right? We need to draw our lines so they're all touching. Otherwise, we might be communicating to somebody that they don't need to connect the wires at the corners. We also try and put components not on corners. That makes it easier to see how those components are wired together. And we have all corners being at right angles because otherwise our drawings, particularly when they get more complex, can get pretty untidy pretty quickly. So as you're working through these two pages in your SciPad, page 69 and 70, we want you to try and be using those rules if you can, if you happen to have the opportunity to do that. The answers to these slides are actually in the next slide over, so have a go at them, and when you're ready to review your answers, they are on that next slide. There's also a couple of SciPad pages here. Now there's two types of circuit which you were hopefully introduced to last year, series circuits and parallel circuits, right? Just as parallel lines go alongside each other, in parallel circuits we might have two components, say like two light bulbs, where the flow of electrons is split across the two of them, right? Because they're next door to each other. In a series, it's like they come one after the other, just like a TV series. So that's the difference in our circuits, and those pages of your ESA guide will help you to understand those differences and help you to answer the next questions. There's also, if your internet's feeling pretty good and you're ready for a bit of a challenge, there's a little simulation you can use. Now that's going to be not as good as the circuits that we can use in the classroom, but it's going to be a pretty good parallel, and if you've got that understanding, then when we come back to class and we're diving into this sort of work, you should be feeling pretty confident to deal with it. So I'd encourage you to click on this and figure out which type of circuit, whether it's series or parallel, makes the bulb the brightest. Now once you've done that, there's an opportunity here for you to have a little bit of a think about times when you might encounter things that are wired in series or times when you might encounter things wired in parallel. And my encouragement to you would be to look at things around your own home. For example, light bulbs. Can you identify any light bulbs or sets of light bulbs where if one goes out, they all go out, which would indicate a series circuit, or where one goes out and all the rest stay on, that would indicate a parallel circuit. So once you've done that, take a pause, and if you're watching this video in later on and you're working through the slides, you can pause here, take a little bit of a break, and then come back to our next lesson, which is on conductors and insulators. So for this lesson, we're kind of tying into some of the stuff around temperature that we've been looking at in the past. So just as we have heat conductors and heat insulators, we have electrical conductors and electrical insulators. Now, electrical conductors allow the flow of electrons to occur rapidly, or the flow of energy, whereas insulators stop that transfer. So conductors allow the transfer insulators stop it or make that process happen very slowly. Part of the reason why we wrap wires in plastic is for exactly that reason. So here's an opportunity for you to fill out this little table and see which ones you think would fit into the conductors column and which ones would fit into the insulators column. And what I'll do at the end of this week when I'm going through your slides is I'll make a little comment and just double check that you've got those all correct. So have a go at that. And then in the next one, we have a little video that kind of explores these ideas and helps you to follow up with the table that's on page 72 of the SciPad. If you do not have a SciPad with you, you can click to access it online, right? And then the answers for that will be in the next page. The last piece of work for this lesson is a little bit of a reading page. 2 pages of your ESA guide, which might help you to answer these fill-in-the-blanks questions. And that will just be a little summary of your understanding. And if you've got a good understanding of that, that shouldn't take you too long to work through. Once you've done that, that's the end of lesson 2. Now, lesson 3 is just the stuff that we're going to do on Friday. That's going to be a little quizzes or a Kahoot. So we don't have to worry about that too much. Our last lesson for today is some revision on these concepts, because we thought you probably want some additional time just to buff up your understanding. There's also an Education Perfect task for this week. I went through that with those of you who did do it, and I've been able to see who's doing well and who needs a little bit of additional support. So if you're worried about anything or you're unsure, let me know. Happy to answer any questions. If you're having trouble logging on to Education Perfect, you can let me know and we can try and work something out. Okay. There's also a little extra for experts around some components that, if you're interested in robotics or if you're interested in some more hardcore electricity stuff, these are some components you'll come across. And they have different symbols for a variety of different reasons. So you'll be familiar maybe with some of these, but you might have not seen some of the other ones before. The last content slide we've got here is this one. Now this will look like a little bit of a doozy, and that's really because this is year 11 stuff. But you're smart enough, so we think you're worthy of the challenge. So there's a little formula that we like to teach students, which is V equals IR. So the voltage that you can feel is a product of the current, which we use the symbol I, and the resistance, how much the flow of electrons is stopped. So those 3 factors all matter. Now, series and parallel circuits have different ways that they respond to voltage and current and resistance. Actually, if you look at them here, the current, the amount of electricity that's flowing through each of these resistors in your series circuit is going to be the same. And I like to think about it kind of like a river. So if we start at the positive end and we imagine ourselves walking around that circuit, you're going to have the same number of electrons. All the electrons only have one path. They're all going to go through resistor 1, then resistor 2, then resistor 3, right? So the current's going to be the same. The flow of electrons is going to be the same through each of those resistors. However, the energy, the voltage, is going to be spread across all 3, right? So some of the energy is going to be used at resistor 1, some of the energy is going to be used at resistor 2, and some of them is going to be used at resistor 3, right? So if you add the voltage across each of those resistors, how much energy is being used at each of them, that gives you the total voltage, right? And that will equal the amount of voltage that's being put in. So if you're using a 12-volt battery, that 12 volts is going to be split across resistor 1, resistor 2, and resistor 3 in a series circuit. Now that just means that for series circuits, the resistance is just, you add them up too, right? You put more roadblocks in the way that slow down or that use any additional energy or that require more resources in terms of energy, that is going to increase your resistance overall. So that is why, for example, if we go back to that simulation that you would have done, and you put a whole bunch of light bulbs in a row, the more light bulbs you add, the dimmer they get, right? Because you're adding to the resistance, and the more resistance, the less energy that can be used per light bulb, right? That's true for series circuits, right? And as it points out there, if one component burns out or stops allowing the flow of electrons, there's nowhere else for them to go. Parallel circuits are a little bit funky, right? And parallel circuits were probably quite common for the funky reason that the amount of energy that is being put in is the same at each of these resistors. Because if you imagine that you've got some electrons all with a whole bunch of energy, they're going to come onto here. They have a choice as to which route they're going to go down, and about the amount that go down each is going to be proportional to how much resistance they meet. Just the same as if you were driving on the roads. If you had a big motorway with very little resistance, you're going to be more likely to go down that than you are to take a gravel road, right? But if there's lots of cars on the motorway already, you're going to be likely to take the gravel road, right? There's going to be a little bit of pressure to take that one. So you kind of end up with a split based on how much resistance is in those different circuits, or in those different parts of the circuits. The amount of current, though, the flow of the river, as some people like to say, is going to be equal to these three paths. Just as if you had a river that started here and then split into three and joined back up again, you'd expect the amount of water going in to be the same amount going out. And it's the same with our electrons, right? The amount of electrons going in at one end are going to be the same as the amount coming out. Therefore, the current, the flow of the electrons, you can just add these three parts of the river together. Now, resistance has a little funky of an equation, and we really don't need to know it at this level. But for those of you who are keen beans, you can have a little bit of a look there. There's some interesting properties with regards to how resistance increases. There are a whole bunch of reasons why this is, but that's why adding in more light bulbs in parallel doesn't decrease the brightness, because this is how resistance increases, according to this formula. The other cool thing is if we cut any of those, if any of those light bulbs burn out or any of those resistors stop allowing flow of electricity, there's still those other two paths for the electricity to flow down. And so, as a result, it keeps going, which is why in your home, if you have a set of light bulbs and one of them goes out, often the other light bulbs nearby it will keep working, even if they're on the same switch. So you don't really need to know too much about this stuff, but I think it's a good opportunity to become introduced to that as we start to test ourselves, and for those of you looking for a little bit of electronics extension. So with that said, that brings us to the end of all the content we need to know for this week, right? And just remember that last little bit, it's a little bit extra for experts, so don't stress too much if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by it. I'll hang on for a minute or two if anyone has any questions, but hopefully we can see that wasn't too much to be going through. We only have that stuff on the fundamental differences between series and parallel circuits and those conductors and insulators things. So I'm going to leave it here for today. I hope you all have a very lovely rest of your day, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you on Friday. So, mate wa, catch you later.